First of all, I'm so very grateful. At this time in my life, my number one emotion is gratitude.
There's power when those words come to you, and that melody comes to you. That comes from a different place. And I've been fortunate enough to feel it and experience it. I feel like, where was I while that was going on? Because it doesn't, it doesn't seem like that all that happened. And probably guilty of not celebrating it more because you're always reaching for the next thing. That's especially in this business. You tend not to rejoice and be thankful at the moment you're in because you're reaching for the next thing. But it amazes me that those things happened, and I keep wanting to go, that's not me.
My number one emotion is gratitude to God and my family and people who've helped me, like Keith. Keith has helped me a lot, and we've written some really good songs together. And but Keith made a good point when he says when you're in the middle of it, you don't really take enough time to appreciate it because you're after it. You're after it, and you can't sit at home and wait on the phone to ring because it doesn't ring. You have to go get it. And so anyhow, I'm mostly grateful, and I have to pinch myself that a country boy, not that educated, honestly, just from the street, I would say, more than anything. I've just been very blessed, very blessed.
Sometimes blessings show up when you have other plans.
I was born in Texas, but I was raised in Louisiana, so that's where my upbringing was. But I think you must be talking about the chance I had to meet Kristofferson, and that was just a fluke. He was actually playing at my college, and one of my best friends who I went to school with called me and said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm playing this club." He goes, "Get your guitar and get over here." He goes, "I'm going to get you in this room with Kristofferson." I went. So I asked the owner of the club, I said, "Can you let me off? I got a chance to meet Kristofferson." He goes, "What are you doing here? Get out of here." So I got my guitar, I ran to the concert, and they put me in this room by myself and said, "Get your guitar out." So I got my guitar out, and I was sitting there ready to go. And in through the door walks Kristofferson and Billy Swan, who was playing that show with him. And
I can help.
Yeah.
Billy Swan.
Yeah. And a couple other guys like Chris Gantry and Donnie Fritz, who were part of his band. Anyway, Chris, sat down in front of me, and I was just, I couldn't quite come to terms with what was happening. It was like something out of a dream scene. But anyway, he said, "Well, play me something," So I played him a couple of songs, which were not great songs, but most of the songs that you write when you start are not that great. But what I found interesting was by the time I got back to the chorus, he was harmonizing with me. He remembered the lyric, and he was singing harmony with me. So anyway, he said, after I played 2 or 3 things, he said, you need to go to Nashville." I said, "Okay." He goes, "Because if you go to Nashville, they're going to bust you." And he said, "What I mean is they're going to tear your songs apart and tell you what's wrong with them." And he goes, "And that's the most important piece." He said, "So if I were you, I'd get your butt to Nashville." And I used that as kind of a door opener for me once I got to Nashville, because if I was just cold calling, walking door to door, knocking, trying to get something going. And if I was lucky enough to get to the receptionist even, I'd say, "Well, Kris told me." And they'd go, "Kris?" I'd go, "Kristofferson." "Oh, we'll come right on in and sit down." Let's, so I used that for every chance I had. But that was a big change for me, having somebody that was from this world actually listen to me and go, this is what you need to do. And he was correct. I got busted quite a bit trying to learn how to write songs.
Every songwriter has to learn, and Roger's dad made a trade that made all the difference to his son.
My daddy traded, he was a trader. He did all kind of work. He was a policeman, he was a trader, he always made a living with a truck. Well, anyhow, he traded an old pickup he had for an acoustic piano. And it was kind of the beginning of me and my a couple of siblings, brother and sister, learning how to play by ear. It meant a lot to us, you know. And we had it in the back room, and our family would get back there sometime and sing and play. And sometimes I spent a lot of hours in there just playing, trying to learn. And I'd make up songs, and it dawned on me kind of early on that these lyrics have to make some sense or they're just a waste of time. So I started trying to make sense out of lyrics. But mostly what that taught me, first of all, was how much emotion is a part of songwriting. And the piano would bring it out of me. And so sometimes I was back there just humming and, you know, struggling, learning how. And so that's where it all began.
Home on leave from the Army, Roger never would have believed that a pair of shoes for his mother would have altered the course of his career.
I took my mother over to a place called Rogersville. That's in North Alabama, and it was known for shoes, for women especially. And so I took her over there when I was on leave one day to let her look for some shoes. And while I was doing that, I told her I wanted to drive on over to the Tri-Cities, Muscle Shoals, Sheffield, and Florence, and meet with a gentleman by the name of Rick Hall, who had become basically an icon for music industry. He basically was the start of the Muscle Shoals scene, which Keith and I both are so much proud of. And Keith's worked there a lot. But anyhow, he gave me my first exclusive songwriting contract, and I was still in the Army. And so I thought I had made it. But then I went back to the Army and finished out my time. But I remember the first time I really thought I was a professional. I cut a demo over in Newport News, Virginia, at a little studio over there, and Rick paid for it, being my publisher. And I thought, man, this is what it's all about, you know. And so those were the beginning days. But I'm so proud to have been signed by Rick. Now, make a long story short, he ended up giving me a release from my contract to come to Nashville. I told him I thought I should pursue country, and I told somebody, I don't know if who he gave the break to, himself or to me. My songs were probably so poor back then that he may have been glad to get rid of me. I don't know, but anyhow, he was nice enough to do that. So I came to Nashville and signed with Bobby Bear's company, and that's kind of really the beginning.
Outside of Nashville and Memphis, there are very few places more influential on music than Muscle Shoals, Alabama.
It's kind of interesting right now because my mother lives in Muscle Shoals by herself because she went down there after my father passed and spent a couple of days at the Marriott. There's an incredible Marriott hotel there that's like a 5-star resort that's in Muscle Shoals. But anyway, so my mother loved it so much, she moved there. But anyway, most of my friends are at Fame Studios, which Rick Hall started. And we did a record, it's been a couple of years ago now, called Small Town Big Sound. And it's got Michael McDonald and Kid Rock Chris Stapleton, Willie, and it's an incredible record. But we tracked that all at Muscle Shoals, and it's just a special place. It's like a convergence of some kind of magic. It hit right in that place, and it's just rare that you have that many talented people in one small area that are that gifted. I don't know. I mean, you can take Los Angeles and New York. Those are massive cities, and you could strain out the creative, gifted people in there. But in Muscle Shoals, it's uncanny how many people there are writers, musicians, engineers that are just carrying on this tradition of what Rick Hall started.
From North Alabama to the early days of Music Row, Nashville was very different then than it is today.
I'll tell you one thing that was going on. There were some just amazing writers in Nashville at that time. Really, some of the people who were architects for the rest of the industry were there at that time. I mean, people like Harlan Howard,
Whitey
Schaefer, Hank Cochran,
Curly Putman.
Yeah, Curly Putman. But Curly Putman was from North Alabama too. And Jim McBride, who ended up writing a lot for Alan's projects, for Alan and Keith's albums, he and I used to come and show our songs to Curly. And I told Curly one time, I said, we were just little Curlies trying to grow up, He really got a kick out of that. But we were from Alabama. But anyhow, I wanted to say there were just some unbelievably talented songwriters at that time that taught what the rest of us inherited. We stand on their shoulders. And really the industry was on their shoulders. Because I've always thought, there's a saying that the Songwriters Association kind of made famous, that it all begins with a song. And when I was president of the Songwriters Association, I almost tried to get the board to change that to it all begins with the songwriter, because that's really where it begins. And but we thought there would be too much politics and too much stuff to try to do that. But that's where it begins. And Nashville is what they call a story town. And there's just a lot of it that goes back to the songs that have been coming out of there.
It all begins with the songwriting, and the performing rights organizations help keep the new songs flowing.
Well, that really kind of turned writing into a career. Mm-hmm. Without that, and there's a lot of us that would have done it for nothing, but the fact that all of a sudden we had some representation in the commercial marketplace of receiving, remuneration for our songs and things that we wrote, and so it was the beginning of valuing what we do.
Well, let's see. Keith was writing for April Blackwood, was it?
Yeah, and I'll jump back out here after I jump in. But that's the one thing about this industry is the synchronicity that is important for things to happen. And Roger and I were writing both for the same big company. Roger had an office in that building, and I was the tape copy boy. So the tape copy room was just 10 feet away from his office. So it put me in a spot to get to hear what he was doing through the walls every day, while I'm making tapes. And that was the beginning. I'll jump back out, but
take your time.
That was the beginning. And the first time I really spoke to him at all, he had locked his keys in the car of this Cutlass that he had, and it was parked out on the street. And he was trying to get his keys out of that Cutlass, and I got a coat hanger and was able to get it. That's probably the most conversation that I ever had with him when I was there. But it was a very special time for me, because the one thing about the writing part of Nashville is it's so much like the Renaissance, in the fact that you had a master and an apprentice, and the master's job was to teach the apprentice everything that he knew. And at some point, that apprentice becomes a master himself, and then mentors the next young apprentice that comes on. And we've lost a lot of that, but that was the key to Nashville's specialness, was that master-apprentice relationship.
That's a good point.
So
Very
anyway,
good point.
back to you there.
Yeah. Another thing I was going to say, when the people were coming, when songwriters were coming from everywhere, men and women coming there, and some of us were kind of, we were kind of, they used to kid about being hayseeds or whatever from the countries, the fields, from everywhere. Well, we weren't really educated on things like copyrights and stuff like that. So one good thing about the Songwriters Association, it taught us about how to protect ourselves and what contracts had in them, and the good and bad of how songs are protected. But that's some of the things I think the Songwriters Association helped. And so we learned how to get our own lawyers and let them help us do better business. So we became a little more sophisticated in the idea of doing business.
One thing that turned out very good for both country music and the music business, meeting Alan Jackson.
It happened over the course of several months. I'm trying to think back here, some of the pieces of this. There was a guy working for me named Gary Overton, who had met Alan, and they had developed a relationship, and Gary kept saying, I got to introduce you to this guy. And so we finally met, but there was nothing happening yet. Alan was actually doing some demos with a friend of mine, a guy named Jimmy Weatherly. And Jimmy was trying to cut sides on Alan to get him a record deal. That was the plan. And that wasn't happening. So in the afternoons, I would go over and hang out at Glenn Campbell's office, which was run by a guy named Marty Gamblin. And Alan would always be in there. I can still see his hat turned up in the window, and he'd be walking around in there, and he'd be, just shooting the bull. I remember he kept trying to trade. He had this old boat. He kept trying to trade me for my bus. And he'd go, look at this thing. He had a Polaroid. He'd go, look at this. And he goes, this would be perfect for you. I'd go, he goes, and I could really use that bus. Anyway, that never happened. But that was the first beginning. So I would drop by there every afternoon usually, and I'd have something I was working on, a demo, and I would play it, and he would go, how'd you get that sound on that vocal? What mic is that? He constantly would quiz me. And he started calling me at the house going, I want you to cut some things on me. And I'd go, well, I can't do that until you and Jimmy, decide that you're not going to work together. So that went on for about 6 months. And he'd call and go, nah. So anyway, he called me one night and he goes, all right, let's go. I go, what are you talking about? And he goes, I just talked to Jimmy and he's fine. He goes, we're going to get a budget to cut some demos. And I said, okay. So he said, call Marty. So I called Marty Gamblin and I said, are you going to let us do something? He goes, yeah, we'll give you $1,600. And that was the beginning. So we jumped in the studio, and the demos were Chasing That Neon Rainbow, Wanted. There's another one in there. I can't remember them now. But anyway,
they were all number ones, weren't
Yeah,
Yeah.
they became
Yeah.
number one. So that was the beginning of that that relationship, and we've been together 30 years now. I guess we've been doing this, something like that. He never chased a trend. He never looked at what was going on the charts and said, "How do I fit in?" He just said, "Let's just do what I do and see what happens." And that's it. People are amazed when I tell them the way these hits that we cut, that we had no master plan. We would, if there was a recording session, he'd bring his bus out. We'd get on the bus and he'd pull out this box that had cassettes in it, and he'd go, "What are we gonna cut?" And I'd go, "I don't know. What do you got?" And we would pull something out of there. He'd go, "What do you think about that?" I said, "That's pretty good. Let's do that." That's the way we did every album. There was not a list of things before we went in, which Nashville is notorious for. We got to have all the songs, we got to have them picked. It wasn't that. It was purely off of a vibe and a conversation about what we liked. And all those hits were done that way.
Don't rock the jukebox. I want to hear some John. My heart ain't ready for the Rolling Stones. Like a rockin'.
Alan had a hook book, he called it, that he carried with him that just was a binder, regular notebook. And he had all these titles written in it. And I remember we were upstairs at Tom Collins' office, and Alan threw that book at me and said, "Find a hook." And I remember coming down that list, and I saw "Don't Rock the Jukebox," and I said, "Let's do that one." and that was it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, Keith and I both just looked at each other. We knew that title alone, we knew it was hit potential. But it was interesting writing that song because I personally knew when we got George Jones and Rolling Stones in the same song, I said, we got something special here. And I also remember how wise Alan was about being an artist. I mean, he hadn't even had a hit at that time, I don't think. But when we came to the second verse, Alan said, he said, he was conscious of not turning anybody off, not including everybody with what we were writing, which is just really smart. And he said he didn't want to denigrate rock and roll in any way. So we picked that up, and I ain't got nothing against rock and roll. But when your heart's been broken, you need a song that's slow. That came from him being smart enough to be inclusive.
Yeah.
You remember us talking about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I want to say right quick, too, on the tail end of what Keith said about them beginning, I think Alan was also smart enough to keep Keith on as his producer all this time. Because a lot of times when artists start having hits, they start making changes. They'll do different producers, they'll do different this and that. But Alan stuck with Keith. He knew what he had, and it's like if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, I think I'm a record producer because of him. I mean, because he was so insistent about me doing these records with him, and I kept going, "What in the world is he seeing in me?" And I could never, but it just kept working and working. After a while, I went, and I told him, I said, "Your instincts are weird, man." I said, "You're always right on with everything that you think." And I said, and I benefited from it because I don't think I would have become a record producer if you hadn't been so insistent that I do your records. And once I started having hits with him, then the floodgates opened for me. Yeah. So it's really because of him that I've had the success that I've had. remarkable guy.
Let me just say something real quick here, kind of a side note. I remember Keith telling me he felt like Alan had what it took, and I, to be perfectly honest, I didn't know, so I didn't feel that same way early on. I didn't hear it, and all to Keith, he had the vision for Alan, and of course, Alan, he was holding all of our songs that we were writing for him. He knew he was going to record them. In fact,
yeah, he got mad about that Conway cut. Conway wanted to cut one of his songs. I remember being in the truck with him, and he goes, "Well, I just found out Conway wants to do," and I can't remember which song it was. It was one that later became a hit for him. He goes, "I don't want anybody else doing my songs."
well, you know how when you're writing, you want to get every cut you can get. Well, I actually pitched "Don't Rock a Jukebox" to the Pirates of the Mississippi. Do you remember that, Keith? Mm-hmm. And I think Alan got upset with me, and I don't even know if he ever got over it.
He never said anything else about it. No. But wow. I do remember at the time.
Yeah, he was upset.
It was a steam pile.
I was just trying to get I was kind of after it because I wanted to get a cut here, cut there. And in Alan's mind, he was holding his songs because he knew he was going to record them.
Yeah, that whole thing was, and I think that's what turned him into a superstar, is because he had that mentality. Whereas the rest of us we're pitching and going and trying to, and he was focused that this is what I got, this is what I'm going to do. And I remember one time talking to him, and I'd ask him, what would you have done if this hadn't worked out? And he goes, "I'd have gone back to doing it and sold cars." Just with no thought about that. That was okay. It was okay. It wasn't, I'm defeated. I'm got to go home and lick my wounds. It was like, this is what I got. I'll go back home and sell cars, which is remarkable because most people are just so affected by the failure and what failure can do to them. And he was like, it's all right. It's going to be okay. So that's his resilience, which is continued to show up over and over. So
Alan's resilience rocked more than just the jukebox. It rocked the entire country music industry.
It brought in a lot of young people that I learned later, because I don't even know if I've ever discussed this with you, Keith. I think I did, but I kind of thought it was a ditty. And that's what you call a song that's just, you kind of sneak one in on the market. But after I found out how many young people came into the market because of that song, mm-hmm. I said, no, this is more than a ditty. And I've appreciated it more because of that. But you know, when we got, this will happen a lot of times when you're writing, when we got that song started, we basically had to stay out of the way of the song. It was telling us what to do. Our objective was not to make a mistake with it. It wasn't to be crafty or show how much we knew or anything. It was to keep it simple and to stay out of the way of the flow, lyrically and melodically, because it just, I don't know, it just came together incredibly, really. And other things we've written have been similar. But that one I remember more specifically, that it just really had the magic almost from the beginning.
Yeah, the other interesting piece about this is when we, when we wrote it, it kind of had a little bit, it was slower and it had a little bit of a lope to it. And so when Alan got his hands on it with his band, they pushed the tempo up and put more of a drive behind it. And so that was him, he reading his audience on what would work. And that was a big piece of it too, because that's the way he heard it. Mm.
Alan, when Alan wrote that song, he completely gained my total respect as a writer. Because I've seen him, quite honestly, I've seen him co-write a lot. And so I always wondered, just how talented he was about that. Well, I found out when he wrote that song, he really, really did stop the world with a masterpiece. And my heart goes out to him, and it did then, that he did that so well. And it was such a healing thing for the world, really. Certainly the United States. And I really appreciate him for that song. And it really gave him a blue ribbon in my book as a songwriter. And it's almost like everything he'd been doing up till then was preparing him for that moment. Mm-hmm. Don't you think? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just wanted to say that right quick. Back to you, buddy.
That particular record ended up on the Drive album, I believe. And we had tracked half that record in August. So I think that's when we actually cut Drive, was in August. And then, of course, September came. And that shift happened. And we had sessions booked for, it might have been 2 weeks after 9/11. And he showed up to the session with that song scribbled on some typing paper. And I got on the bus with him, which I normally would do when we're tracking and talk about what we're going to record, like I told you earlier. And he said, I got this song I wrote. And he goes, I don't know whether I need to do it or not. Mm. He goes, I don't want people to think I'm trying to take advantage of something terrible that's happened. I said, okay. So he played it. And
what did you think?
I thought, whew, the gravity that I felt I can't even describe it, but it was powerful. And I said, man, excuse me, while I try to get through. I said, the world needs to hear this. Mm. And I said, we need to do this next. Mm. So we walked back in and recorded it. And interestingly enough, he had a song that was climbing up the charts at the time. And we tracked it. And as soon as we finished tracking it, he walked in and he said, what do you think? I said, I think this needs to be out yesterday. And so I called Joe Galante and I said, Joe, you need to get over to the studio right now and hear this. So Joe brought his people, brought his creative team and his marketing team over. And they quickly shifted gears on the single that was out. They stopped promoting and then they released this. And then I actually flew to Toronto to do the strings, got it back just in time for the EMA Awards. And to this day, I don't know how in the world he got through it, because he went out there on that stage and sat down with his guitar and played it. And it was just a moment that stays burned in your brain, of what it did, what it helped. And it was just powerful.
What a contribution, man. What a contribution from both of you.
Yeah. Well, he is truly a gift, There's not many of him running around anywhere.
The first song they cut of ours was a song that a guy named Tim Lewis and I wrote called Burn, Georgia, Burn. It was an album cut on Feel So Right album. They also cut another song of ours called Ozark Mountain Jubilee, which ended up being it's still in the can. It never did come out. And then they cut High Cotton, Southern Star, and I'm in a Hurry and Don't Know Why. But after actually, I kind of got in pretty early when Harold Shedd was doing them. Harold kind of brought them to life. And so they became familiar with me, my writing early on. And so they'd kind of check in with me when they get ready to record. And I was just blessed that way by them. And, but I remember there was a time in their career where they were really kind of in a lull. And they were really needing a monster. They really needed a hit. And so I was going down to pitch some songs up. And my wife at the time, as I answered the call, she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm getting ready to go down to the studio and take Alabama some." They wanted to hear anything new that I had. And she said, "Are you taking I'm in a Hurry and Don't Know Why?" Well, at the time, it wasn't on my list. And it was one of those times where you don't think yourself out of something. You know how you can do that when you start picking songs and stuff like that. I said, "Well, I'll take it." So I took it, and it blew them away. They loved it. Randy Van Warmer and I wrote it. And they wanted to know who was playing bass on it. They wanted to know everything about it. Long story short, we were so fortunate on the timing on that song. It just became a monster for them, a resurging kind of hit. And but I've got to tell a quick story, as quick as I can, about Ozark Mountain Jubilee. And I haven't even told those guys this. I've told only a few people. Well, at that time, I don't even know if I could afford a hamburger or whatever. Long story short, I needed money in any way I could get it. So I found out they recorded it, and I was thrilled to death. So Harold Shedd let me come over and listen to it. And they had made a love song out of this song. And you'd have to hear the song. It became a hit by Oak Ridge Boys. William Lee Golden sang it. But Alabama had tried to make a love song out of it. It's not a love song. And I mean, honestly, they really, really messed it up. I mean, it was just all due respect to those guys. They know how much I love them and how much they've been a part of my career. But that was so bad. It was so bad. I was at the point, I was going to go over and talk to Harold Shedd about, please don't put this out. It was so embarrassing what they did to it. I know this is hard to believe, but it's a true story. But as it happened, they didn't release it, so, and I didn't have to go talk to Harold. So, wow. Did you ever hear that? Did I ever tell you that? Isn't that funny? Isn't it funny? But
that happens.
Well, whatever it is, Keith saw it and decided to jump right in.
I'm starting, at this point in my career, I'm starting to realize how much, and I've used this word again, synchronicity, how much you have to rely on it, because some of the things that happen just seem to be gifts. They just come, and that's why you can never give up. You have to always, even at our place, in our careers now, you have to always be open and ready to receive when it comes in. But I got a call from a gentleman who was an attorney who said, I've got an act that I work with who's playing 3rd and Lindsley tonight, and I think you're the only guy in town that's going to get this. Go see it. And so I went to 3rd and Lindsley, and I walked in, and there was this guy on stage with a beard and a beanie, and I think it was 4 pieces at the time. And the guy in the front had some kind of magic going on that I can't I can't even define what that is, except there was some kind of twinkle in his eye, and I went, whoa, there's something coming off of this stage that's hitting me, that's powerful. So the guy that managed me was a guy named Alan Cates, and I said, go talk to this guy, Zac, and tell him I want to work with him. I want to do a record with him. And that was the beginning. So Zac and I talked, and he goes, well, how do you want to make this record? And I said, with your band. He goes, well, the other people that we met with in Nashville wanted to put session players on it and change the name of the band to Chicken Fried. And I said, I don't even want to go down that road with you. I said, but let's use your band. And so, a month later, I was in Atlanta, and we had rented actually it was a studio that belonged to his one of the guys in his band, and that's where we tracked the foundation. And after I had the record, I sat on it for about a year trying to get somebody to listen to it, and I couldn't get response out of anybody. And so basically what happened was, with some funding, I put a promotion staff together with a guy that's a friend of mine, Michael Powers, and we chased radio with it. And it exploded about, probably 2 months into promoting it. And and it went to number one. It went number one CMA week, which was kind of ironic. But that's how you just know, even though the rest of the world is telling you, I don't get it. And I just felt like there was something special there, and it worked.
I remember us sitting in a parking lot. You said, come here, I want to play you something. And he played me that album, I believe the whole album.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed Keith's excitement about it, because I knew if he was excited, something's going on here. And I thought it was fantastic, but I didn't have the vision he did about it. But man, and then it just came on, took over.
Yeah.
Wow.
That happens. That still happens.
But you could see the vision. You could see it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the vision was, the world needs to hear this record. That was my vision. Now, how do we get there? And it was difficult, but I just knew the music would move people. It would connect with people. He's got a song on there that he wrote by himself called Free, which is probably the most powerful song on the album. And it took having 3 hits before we finally released it. But I think Chicken Fried blew the doors down for it to happen.
Amazing opportunity. I tell you, Waylon was just a great guy. Had the best sense of humor. He had the biggest heart. He really had a heart, big as Texas. But anyhow, he called me one day and asked me to meet with him. And I was writing for Tom Collins at the time. So I go down to his office, which was really decorated, really cool. It's like Western. One of the ladies that worked for him designed it all. It was really, really cool. It looked like Waylon, it really did. Well, anyhow, I went down there. I took my father-in-law and my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law brought his camera. He's kind of a amateur photographer. So I brought them where they could meet him. And anyhow, he was talking to him. He said, Hoss, I want to write a album about my life before somebody gets it wrong. So he said, I'd like for you to help me write it. And unbeknownst to me, he had been listening to some of my songs, and he loved the way I phrased. And he had cut 2 or 3 songs of mine. And so I met with him, and it was right before Christmas. And he said, why don't we get together the first of the year and let's talk about it. And so I left his office after really just having a time of my life, sitting in there talking to him. And thinking in my head as I was leaving, well, I may never hear from him again or whatever, but true to his word, as Waylon was, he called me, I think in January, and I got with him again, and we sat down and talked about how we were going to write this. And he said what he'd like to do, each song would be a different chapter in his life. And so then he started showing up at Tom Collins Music, where I had a little office, and we wrote it there in a little small office. It's like a big closet is what it was. And but Waylon, he would park what he called his golden nose. That was an Eldorado gold Cadillac. He'd park it in front of the office every other day. First thing he wanted to do is, who's going to go get the Browns? What he's talking about, Brown's Burgers. He loved those things. And then we'd all sit around and eat Brown's Burgers, and Waylon would tell his war stories about he and Willie and all of them. And of course, everybody coming in the office, you just couldn't believe Waylon Jennings sitting in there. And so we just had a ball. He was such a gracious guy. He really was. I remember hearing stories about him buying an organ for a black church out in Tennessee. Just bought him that as a gift. He was just known for things like that. You know, he wouldn't talk about it, but somebody else might. But he was a great guy, great guy. I had a staff writer named Rachel Proctor, and she asked me, we were getting ready to have a Christmas party, and she asked me if she could bring a friend with her, which no one had ever asked me that before. I said, sure. So she brings this guy, tall, dark, and handsome guy named Luke Bryan. And so we were celebrating the holiday together there. And after it's all over, I told my right-hand man, Paul Compton, I said, if this guy can sing his name, we're going to sign him. Because he showed so much charisma. People loved him. He was just a delight to be around. And so we ended up signing Luke, and we're the first to sign him. And he stayed with me for 6 years. And I jokingly tell people I taught him everything he knows. But Luke and I both know that's not true.
You can sing it again.
It's like a diamond ring, it's a precious thing. And we never want to lose it. Favorite song that we love to sing. Every time we hear the music, I tell you, we're in this love together. We got the kind that will last forever. Oh, we're in this love together. And like berries on the vine, it gets sweeter all the time. I remember Keith walking in the door that morning at this little brown house across from the RCA building that was owned by Ray Stevens, right? Mm-hmm. So I said, Keith, what do you think about this title? And I said, I told him, we're in this love together. He said, well, I like it, but it doesn't sound country to me. And of course, I wasn't even thinking about the genre of it, really. I just liked the title. But Keith sat down, if I recall correctly, he started a riff on his guitar. And that riff stayed with that song throughout its lifetime. It was used in the production of the song when Al Jarreau did it. And it all began very simply with, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 instruments at the old CBS
Yeah,
studio.
it was in the tracking room, they called it.
Yeah.
That little
Yeah. And
cubby hole.
and that whatever it was, Keith started that with his guitar. And of course I loved it. And the riff kind of pulled the lyrics from us. And we were both loved R&B. I came from R&B, really. That was my roots. And so it was very natural for us to go into the melody of it. And of course, Keith has written other big hits, R&B songs. And but anyhow, it just kind of became its own thing. Go ahead and add to anything you have.
No, I remember walking into your office and you going, well, what do you think about this? And I remember saying, I don't think this sounds like a country song. This sounds a little pop. And which I can explain this a little bit later. The chord progressions in the beginning of the verse and the chorus were the same. When we got to the tracking room, I realized that chorus needs to do something different. So the verses were 1, 3 minor. When I thought about it, I said, okay, that chorus should be 1, 6 minor. And so that broke the monotony up.
Wow.
But
See, I didn't know. I haven't heard that.
That had
See,
always.
I don't know enough about music, but I'm loving hearing that.
Yeah, because it allowed the chorus to go somewhere but it sounded reminiscent of the verse, but it went somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, man, so much credit goes to Michael Lombardi and Jay Graydon that put that track together for Al. They just, Omardian is incredible. I mean, what he did.
You know, I didn't realize he did. I didn't know he was the other guy.
He was the keyboard player on We're in This Love Together. And Steve Gadd, incredible drummer, incredible Los Angeles drummer. But you know, you want to tell the story about the bottom of the bucket of cassettes?
No, I want you to tell it because I'm not sure about a thing or two about that. But Ed Thomas sent it, right?
Yeah, Ed Thomas sent it to the Larson Featon Band. And they were a rock duo that were managed by a guy named Patrick Raines, I think. But Patrick also managed Al Jarreau. So they had the boxes that would sit out where pitches would be, Cassettes would be put into that box. That cassette wound up in the wrong box. It was supposed to be in the Larson Featon Band box. This is what I'm talking about, synchronicity, the way this stuff happens. So it wound up in the wrong box. It wound up in Al's box. And the night before the sessions, they were going through songs, Jay Graydon kept saying, we gotta have a hit. We've got to have a hit. And they'd gone through that box, and there was one cassette left in that box. And he told me, he said, I picked it up and I looked at Al and I said, this better be our hit. And it was.
Well, it was nominated for Grammy.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that album was Breaking Away. It was the title of the album.
It gets sweeter all the time.
That came because we had cherries. We kept saying cherries on the vine, and Roger goes, cherries don't grow on the vine.
I remember, I appreciate you bringing that line up because I remember we wrote all of the song except for one line.
Yeah.
And I was driving home down I-65 that afternoon and got to the Brentwood exit. And that's where that line came from. Like berries on the vine, it gets sweeter all the time. That was the last line written. And you know what? It's so interesting to me because I think in there that kind of thing is used in some other R&B songs. Are you familiar with any specifics? But heard it through the grapevine, all those things. Well, for some reason, it struck my head like that, and
it worked.
Yeah, it really worked. But Al Jarreau was just an exceptional entertainer. And I remember when he came to Nashville, we had never met him. I had, of course. And we were out in the audience, and he said...
he mispronounced our names.
Yeah.
Stegall Murrah. Stegall Murrah.
I thought he said Murat on me. I remember the first song I ever got recorded. I couldn't wait to see the label, okay? I looked down, and they spelled my name, Murratt.
Murat.
Murat. I thought, okay, that was good for my little ego, for that to happen on that first. But yeah, Al mispronounced our name. But boy, was he a wonderful man. He just was. But when I heard about that he had cut it, when we heard about it, I thought, of course, I didn't know who he was. And I went downtown and I bought an album of his. I used to know the name of it. But anyhow, I came back and told Keith, I said, man, I don't know what he's going to do to this song, but it's going to be great. Because...
Yeah, no, but we didn't know who he was. I said, I found out he was a jazz artist, and
he was more of a pure
how in
jazz.
the world is this going to work? This got my first jazz cut, and that's what I was thinking. And then I heard the record and I went, oh.
Mm-hmm. That must have been Graydon. The vision on Graydon.
Oh yeah, I mean Jay Graydon produced George Benson too, so he had this.
That's right. Yeah.
This whole team
that
did those records and exceptional musicians.
Yeah. And you called it centricity, is that what it? Synchronicity. And there's also a lot of serendipity about what we do as well. And those things, like those musicians being on that session, I mean, it's just magical. It's beyond explanation. Yeah. How things like that come together, and when we were the great beneficiaries of that, and and I'm sure surprisingly they thought this came from Nashville, and then Nashville was really beginning to get on the map as a song center, where all kinds of things had been been written here. And all that time that country music, deservingly so, was getting all the credit about Nashville, there was all kind of great music being cut here. R&B, just name it, pop.
Music City has talent everywhere. You just never know when the next superstar is cooking your catfish.
The Randy Ray story goes back to a golf tournament at Henry Horton State Park. Called the A-Cup Rose Golf Tournament. And at the end of the first day, a bunch of us were just hanging out in the hotel, which was like, the old hotels where you got the entrance goes to the outside. You're not inside. You just walk right into the room. And I was in this room sitting with a guy named Elroy Kahanick, who was a big promoter. Gary Morris was in the room, the singer. And I was there, and this kid stumbles in with a guitar case. And this woman, this platinum blonde woman, was with him, which was Lib Hatcher.
Wow.
And Elroy said, Keith, he wants to play you a couple of songs. I went, well, okay. So Randy got the guitar out and sat on the side of the bed, and played Reasons I Cheat, and I can't recall the other song. But I heard this voice and I went, holy cow. Anyway, he played those couple of songs and he left. Well, the next week, his manager and Randy came to the office, to my office. That's where I actually met him. And so the next step was they had a house on Music Row, and I needed some more space, so I rented a downstairs office from them to move my operation up there. Anyway, I was seeing Randy every day, and he would drop off cassette. Oh, Keith, this thing I wrote, and so I'm listening on cassette, and I'm going, holy cow, this guy is amazing. And so at Christmas time, the guy that owned the Nashville Palace, where Randy was actually playing and cooking, he was actually in the kitchen.
Oh, okay. I thought he was a dishwasher. I'm sorry.
He was actually the cook, because I'd go out there and his manager would go make him cook catfish so I could have a piece of catfish. But anyway, so we did a live record at the Palace, and it was called Randy Ray Live from the Nashville Palace. And I started playing cuts off of that record for people in Nashville, trying to help get something started. And I remember one famous producer said, if this stuff hits, he goes, it'll set the town back 20 years. But that's because Randy was so traditional. But there was something amazing happening coming out of those speakers when you heard that voice. And I went, this is just incredible. So anyway, long story short, I was an artist, and I was an artist on Columbia. I was being produced by Kyle Lenning, who was a good friend of mine.
Great producer.
And a great producer. And I took Martha Sharp from Warner Brothers out to see Randy at the Palace, and she signed him on the spot that night and asked me, do you want to produce this? And I said, well, I'm on the road. I'm traveling so much. Why don't we ask Kyle Lenning, who's my producer, for us to partner up and do it together. And I still was traveling so much, I had a guilt complex about not being available for Randy, so I backed out right before Randy blew up. I backed out, and the rest is history.
How does name get changed to Travis?
That was actually Martha. Martha Sharp did that. Changed it to Travis, from Treywick to Travis.
Is his original name Treywick?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I've read that, but I didn't.
And but actually, there's a whole other story that comes behind me backing out of that production thing, because that was right before 1982 was released. And then on the other hand, got re-released. It was released twice, and it, on the other hand, is just blew up.
Was that your song that you would?
Well, actually, it was the Don Schlitz, Paul Overstreet song.
Mm-hmm.
But we knew it was a hit. But the first time it was released, it was the first track released. It didn't do anything. It died in the 50s. And then 1982 was next. Then, after 1982 blew up, then they went back and re-released on the other hand. At that point, I had left the production arrangement because I felt guilty. Well, when that thing blew up, I went, oh my gosh, I should have stayed with this. I need to be a record producer. And then that's the story I was telling you about, getting the envelope from Warner Brothers and opening it up, and there was a $13,000 check in there. And I went, holy cow, I've got to make some career changes. And that's when I told myself, the next artist that I come in contact with that wants me to work with them, I'm staying put. And the next artist was Alan Jackson.
Wow, great story. Great story.
Boy, it's a gift.
It
There's
is
no
a gift.
question about it. There's a lot of people that go that have come to town that wanted to be writers. And I'm not saying that some of us are smarter than other people, but they just don't have the gift.
Mm-hmm.
And it is truly a gift and a blessing. And I think even Jackson has said this. What was it he said? I held the pen, but I didn't, the words weren't mine. And that's, there's there's power in when those words come to you and that melody comes to you. That comes from a different place. That's an anointing, is what I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been fortunate enough to feel it and experience it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. Of all the emotions of this life, there's nothing that really, truly makes me more happy than a great song.
Yeah.
I don't know why. That's just it. It's just some way I know how to explain it. But I mean, when Keith and I have written on many occasions, and boy, when it starts coming together, I mean, it's just, you feel so blessed. I mean, it's just nothing like it. But I want to quickly say the things that people mix up about songwriting sometimes, that skill, you can learn skill, but you can't learn the gift. That kind of has to come. I think you can conjure the gift a bit, but there is a seed of gift in the great songwriters, I believe, and then we learn skills to formulate the gift, and we basically we learn how to protect that gift, that thing that we can't explain, and we all want to thank God for those blessings when they happen. But I've told a couple of people, I think we give God credit for some things sometimes that he
doesn't
want
want
credit for.
for.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm careful about what I say about divine involvement, and but I do believe if it's not direct, God allows things to happen in that process that we benefit from. But most important on songs, they need to reach people. They need to move people. I mean, you mentioned Beethoven, was it? Or Bach? I mean, they were doing things, and we've been blessed enough to do some things that actually get into people. It's a healing thing. I actually learned this later on in my career, just how healing and how much help songwriting can be to people out there in the world. Just a quick note. We had a song that Philip White, and I forget the other guy's name, wrote called "I'm Moving On."
D. Vincent Williams.
D. Vincent Williams, yes. They put that song out with Rascal Flatts, and we got an email. As publishers, we received an email about that, and this young man was about to take his own life, and heard that song, and it changed his mind, saved his life. Now that's just one example. What's it doing around the world to people? And so it's amazing. It's amazing art to be a part of.